sex symbol, she appeared in more than 50 films. Ava Gardner suffered a stroke 3 years ago. She died after an attack of pneumonia. She was 67.
The news reports that filled television screens around the world spoke in measured tones about the passing of a Hollywood legend, a woman whose face once defined glamour and whose name echoed through an era now fading into memory. But beneath those calm announcements was a life that burned fiercely, recklessly, and often painfully. The headlines could not capture the storms she lived through, nor the shadows that followed her long after the cameras stopped rolling. The story that followed those reports was not one of simple fame. It was a tale shaped by desire, defiance, and self-destruction, a life that glittered on the surface while quietly unraveling beneath. On March 1st, 1990, Ava Gardner was found dead in her London apartment, her body finally giving in after years of illness and isolation. Officially, it was described as pneumonia following a series of strokes. But for those who truly knew her story, that date marked the end of a long, slow goodbye that had begun decades earlier. Welcome to Starlet Mystery. To understand how Ava Gardner reached that lonely ending, we must rewind to a moment when her life first collided with danger and desire in a way that would define her forever. On September 23, 1950, one of Hollywood's most violent scandals erupted when Gardner's husband, Frank Sinatra, was attacked outside the Desert Inn in Palm Springs. Blood spilled, police arrived, and whispers spread through Hollywood that Ava Gardner's love life was not only destructive, but potentially lethal. That night became a symbol of the chaos that followed her wherever she went, a warning sign that fame and passion were steering her toward a life lived on the edge. Long before she became a symbol of scandal and seduction, Ava Gardner was simply a quiet girl born into hardship. Ava Lavinia Gardner entered the world on December 24, 1922, in the tiny farming community of Grabtown, North Carolina. She was the youngest of 7 children, born to Jonas Gardner, a sharecropper, and Mary Elizabeth "Molly" Baker, a devout Baptist schoolteacher. Poverty was not an abstract concept in Ava's childhood. It was a daily reality. The family lived without electricity or running water, and survival depended on discipline, faith, and endurance. When Ava was still young, tragedy struck. Her father died when she was just a child, forcing her mother to move the family to Brogdon, North Carolina, where Molly ran a boarding house to keep them afloat. The loss of her father left a quiet fracture inside Ava, shaping a sense of emotional independence that would later harden into defiance. She learned early that life offered no guarantees and that vulnerability often led to loss. As a child, Ava was shy, observant, and deeply self-conscious. She had no interest in performance or celebrity. Teachers remembered her as withdrawn but striking, already possessing the natural beauty that would later mesmerize Hollywood. Yet at the time, that beauty felt like a burden. Ava did not see herself as extraordinary. She saw herself as someone meant to survive, not to shine. During her adolescence, Ava attended Brogdon High School, where she remained academically average but socially reserved. Her thick Southern accent made her feel out of place, and she struggled with insecurity about her appearance. Despite her later reputation as one of the most beautiful women in cinema history, Ava spent her teenage years unaware of her allure. After graduating from high school, she briefly attended Atlantic Christian College in Wilson, North Carolina, intending to study secretarial work. It was a practical choice, reflecting her belief that life required stability, not dreams. But destiny intervened through chance rather than ambition. In late 1940, Ava traveled to New York City to visit her older sister Bappy, who was married to professional photographer Larry Tarr. During her visit, Tarr took a casual portrait of Ava and displayed it in his studio window. That single photograph would alter the course of her life forever. A scout from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer noticed the image and contacted Tarr, asking about the mysterious woman with the arresting gaze. Within weeks, Ava Gardner found herself offered a screen test with MGM. Despite having no acting experience, no training, and no intention of becoming an actress. She signed a contract with the studio in 1941, moving from rural North Carolina to the artificial dreamscape of Hollywood almost overnight. The transition was brutal. Studio executives mocked her accent, criticized her lack of polish, and subjected her to relentless training designed to reshape her into something more marketable. Ava struggled deeply during those early years. She was labeled untalented and uncooperative, and for several years she appeared only in minor, uncredited roles. The studio even considered terminating her contract, convinced she lacked the skill to succeed. Emotionally, Ava felt isolated and overwhelmed, trapped in a world that valued her appearance, but doubted her substance. Her personal life during this period reflected her inner confusion. On July 10, 1942, she married actor Mickey Rooney, one of MGM's biggest stars at the time. The marriage was impulsive and deeply mismatched. Rooney's infidelity and controlling behavior quickly eroded any illusion of happiness. The union collapsed amid public scandal, and they divorced on May 21, 1943. The experience left Ava disillusioned with love and wary of Fame's ability to distort intimacy. Despite the heartbreak, Ava refused to retreat. She worked obsessively with acting coaches, determined to prove she was more than a pretty face. Slowly, the industry's perception began to shift. Her breakthrough arrived with the film Whistle Stop, released on January 29, 1946, where her raw, unpolished intensity captured attention. Critics noted a newfound depth in her performances, a sense of danger simmering beneath her beauty. True stardom arrived with The Killers, released on August 28, 1946. Ava's portrayal of the fatal femme fatale Kitty Collins electrified audiences. The role transformed her image overnight, recasting her as a symbol of temptation and moral ambiguity. Fame hit Ava like a tidal wave, and with it came pressure, scrutiny, and expectation. Privately, she struggled to reconcile her public image with her private self, feeling trapped by a persona she never consciously chose. As her career ascended, her personal life grew more volatile. On February 17, 1945, she married bandleader Artie Shaw, whose intellectual arrogance and emotional coldness left Ava feeling inadequate and diminished. Shaw openly criticized her intelligence, deepening her insecurities. The marriage ended in divorce on May 11, 1946, reinforcing Ava's growing belief that love, like fame, was fleeting and unreliable. By the late 1940s, Ava Gardner had become one of MGM's most valuable stars. Films like Showboat, released on April 14, 1951, cemented her status as a leading lady. Yet behind the glamour, her life was unraveling. Alcohol became a constant presence, a means of numbing anxiety and loneliness. According to those close to her, Ava drank not to celebrate, but to escape, masking vulnerability behind bravado. Her most infamous relationship began in 1949, when she met Frank Sinatra. Their connection was immediate, obsessive, and destructive. Sinatra was married at the time, and their affair ignited one of Hollywood's most scandalous romances. Paparazzi followed their every move, capturing moments of passion and violence alike. Ava and Frank fought fiercely, reconciled dramatically, and destroyed each other emotionally in cycles that became legend. The chaos reached a public breaking point on November 7, 1951, when Ava Gardner married Frank Sinatra. The marriage intensified their self-destructive tendencies, fueled by jealousy, career pressures, and mutual insecurity. Hollywood watched as two icons burned each other alive in the glare of fame. By the early 1950s, Ava stood at the peak of her career, yet internally she was exhausted. Fame had given her everything she never sought and taken everything she needed to survive emotionally. The woman who once fled poverty now found herself imprisoned by success, struggling to hold on to a sense of self as her life spun increasingly out of control. And this was only the beginning of Ava Gardner's descent. Ava Gardner's marriage to Frank Sinatra did not calm the storms inside her. It magnified them. By the time she entered the early 1950s, she was no longer just a rising star. She was a symbol, a projection of desire and danger that Hollywood both celebrated and feared. The world watched her glow on screen while her private life fractured under relentless scrutiny. The marriage that began on November 7, 1951, quickly became a battleground. Sinatra's career was faltering while Ava's was ascending, and that imbalance poisoned their bond. He was consumed by jealousy and insecurity. She was suffocating under guilt and responsibility. Their arguments became legendary, erupting in public places, hotel corridors, and studio lots. According to those close to them, the fights were fueled by alcohol, resentment, and a shared inability to walk away. Hollywood gossip columns thrived on their chaos. Some believe that Ava blamed herself for Sinatra's professional decline, a weight that fed her drinking and deepened her emotional exhaustion. She loved him fiercely, but love had become indistinguishable from destruction. By October 29, 1957, their marriage officially ended in divorce, though the emotional scars lingered long after the legal bond was severed. Ironically, as her personal life collapsed, Ava Gardner reached the height of her artistic power. In 1953, she starred in Mogambo, released on October 9, 1953, delivering a performance that silenced critics who once dismissed her as talentless. The role earned her an Academy Award nomination and confirmed what Hollywood had long doubted. Ava Gardner was not merely beautiful, she was formidable. Fame now carried authority, but it came at a cost. The industry demanded perfection while offering no protection. During this period, Ava cultivated an image of fearless independence. She spoke openly, refused studio control, and challenged Hollywood's moral codes. Behind that defiance was a woman increasingly haunted by anxiety, insomnia, and a sense of isolation. Alcohol became her constant companion. Nights blurred into mornings, and excess became routine, rather than exception. By the mid-1950s, Ava sought escape from Hollywood itself. She moved to Spain in 1954, drawn to its rawness, its danger, and its emotional honesty. There, she immersed herself in bullfighting culture and entered a passionate relationship with famed matador Luis Miguel Dominguin. The affair was intense and volatile, marked by jealousy, infidelity, and violence. Some believe that Ava was drawn to men who mirrored her own internal chaos, men who lived close to death and embraced risk without restraint. Her time in Spain coincided with one of the most daring performances of her career. The Barefoot Contessa, released on September 29, 1954, became both a professional triumph and a haunting reflection of her own life. The character's tragic arc mirrored Ava's growing sense that fame was a curse disguised as destiny. Audiences saw glamour. Ava felt exposed. As the 1960s approached, Hollywood began to change, and so did its tolerance for aging actresses. Ava, once the embodiment of cinematic sensuality, felt the industry's attention slowly drift. Roles became less frequent, scripts less inspired. Though she delivered powerful performances in films like On the Beach, released on December 17, 1959, the emotional toll of years spent living intensely began to surface physically. In 1960, Ava Gardner married again, this time to actor and producer Walter Chiari. The marriage, officially beginning on April 10, 1963, was brief and turbulent. Allegations of infidelity and drug involvement surrounded Chiari, and Ava found herself once again trapped in a relationship that promised stability but delivered chaos. They divorced on November 11, 1972, marking her final marriage and reinforcing her belief that love was a battlefield she was destined to lose. By the late 1960s, Ava's health was deteriorating. Years of heavy drinking and emotional stress manifested in chronic pain and fatigue. She continued to work sporadically, appearing in projects like Night of the Iguana, released on November 14, 1964, where her raw vulnerability earned critical acclaim. Yet the effort required to perform grew heavier, and the joy she once found in acting had faded. According to those close to her, Ava felt betrayed by Hollywood, a machine that had profited from her image and discarded her once she no longer fit its fantasy. She withdrew socially, maintaining only a small circle of trusted friends. Though she remained fiercely witty and unapologetically honest, loneliness crept into her daily existence. The most devastating blow arrived in 1986 when Ava suffered a massive stroke. The event left her partially paralyzed and unable to speak clearly for long periods. The woman who once commanded screens with her voice and presence now struggled with basic independence. Confined largely to her London apartment, Ava entered a period of quiet suffering far removed from the spotlight that once defined her. Financial strain compounded her isolation. Despite decades of success, medical bills mounted, and she relied heavily on the support of friends, including Frank Sinatra, who quietly paid many of her expenses. Their relationship, once explosive and destructive, had softened into something resembling mutual understanding. Love, stripped of romance, lingered in acts of loyalty. Ava Gardner's final public appearance occurred in 1989, when she was photographed briefly leaving her London residence. The images shocked fans. The glamorous icon was almost unrecognizable, her frailty a stark contrast to the immortal beauty preserved on film. For Ava, this was the ultimate cruelty of fame, to be remembered forever as someone she no longer was. And as the months passed, her world grew smaller, quieter, and darker. What remained were memories, regrets, and a legacy still being written. By the late 1980s, Ava Gardner was no longer living in the world that once worshipped her. She existed in a quieter realm, one defined by physical limitation, fading memories, and the slow reckoning of a life lived without restraint. The woman who once challenged studios, lovers, and fate itself now faced a silence she could not charm her way out of. After her devastating stroke in 1986, Ava's health declined steadily. Her mobility was limited, her speech impaired, and her independence gradually stripped away. For someone who had built her entire identity on freedom and defiance, this loss cut deeper than any scandal or heartbreak she had ever endured. According to those close to her, Ava feared helplessness more than death itself. Now it surrounded her. She spent her days largely confined to her London apartment, surrounded by photographs that froze her at the height of her beauty. The contrast was merciless. The mirror reflected a body weakened by time and excess, but her mind remained sharp enough to remember everything she had been and everything she had lost. Regret arrived not as a dramatic revelation but as a quiet companion that lingered in the long hours of isolation. Despite her withdrawal, Ava was not forgotten. Friends visited when they could, offering companionship without pity. Among them was Frank Sinatra. Though their marriage had ended in bitterness decades earlier, he remained a constant presence in her final years. According to those aware of the arrangement, Sinatra helped cover her mounting medical expenses, a gesture that spoke volumes about a bond that had outlived romance. Love, in its final form, had become loyalty. In late 1989, paparazzi captured images of Ava Gardner leaving her residence, assisted and visibly frail. The photographs spread quickly, shocking a public accustomed to remembering her only as an untouchable goddess. For many, it was the first time they confronted the reality that icons age, suffer, and disappear just like everyone else. Ava reportedly despised those images, feeling exposed in a way no film role had ever demanded. As winter deepened, her health worsened. Pneumonia set in, overwhelming a body already weakened by years of illness. On March 1, 1990, Ava Gardner died at the age of 67. The official cause was pneumonia following a stroke. The news traveled swiftly across the world, carried by anchors who spoke her name with reverence, accompanied by montages of her immortal face, glowing on black and white screens. Yet death did not arrive as a dramatic climax. It came quietly, almost gently, as if exhaustion had finally overtaken resistance. Ava Gardner had lived intensely, recklessly, and without apology. Her body had simply reached its limit. Her funeral was private, understated, attended by close friends rather than an industry spectacle. She was laid to rest in Sunset Memorial Park in North Carolina, returning at last to the soil that shaped her long before Hollywood claimed her. It was a fitting conclusion for a woman who never truly belonged to the world that made her famous. In the years that followed, Ava Gardner's legacy settled into something more complex than glamour. She was remembered not only as one of the most beautiful women ever filmed, but as a figure who challenged Hollywood's expectations. She refused to be molded, resisted control, and lived according to her own impulses, even when they led her toward pain. Her performances endure because they carried that authenticity, that sense of danger and emotional truth that could not be taught. Some believe Ava Gardner was a victim of her era, trapped in a system that valued her image more than her humanity. Others argue she was fiercely autonomous, choosing intensity over safety at every turn. The truth lies somewhere in between. Ava Gardner was both shaped by her circumstances and defiant against them, a contradiction that made her unforgettable. What remains unresolved is whether she found peace. According to those who knew her best, Ava rarely spoke of regret, but often spoke of exhaustion. Perhaps peace for her was simply rest, an end to expectation, an end to performance. The films continue to play. The face remains luminous. The voice echoes with confidence and vulnerability, intertwined. Time cannot erase what Ava Gardner left behind, but it can soften the edges of her pain into something resembling meaning. And so we return to those opening news reports. Calm voices announcing the death of a legend. Headlines summarizing a life too vast, too turbulent, too human to be contained in a few measured sentences. Behind those reports was a woman who rose from poverty to immortality, who loved fiercely, lived dangerously, and paid dearly for both. A woman who burned bright enough to leave scars on everyone she touched, including herself. The screen fades, the images linger, and, somewhere between myth and memory, Ava Gardner remains, forever walking the line between beauty and ruin, long after the news has gone silent.